Hello and welcome to another OET lesson. In this one, we are looking at tips and strategies to help you get the required score that you need to achieve your dreams of either working in English-speaking countries or studying. In the listening subtest, we know that you're listening to 10 recordings to answer 42 questions. To be able to register with most governing councils and boards, you need to get a B in the listening subtest. And this requires that you get a minimum of 30 correct answers to be able to do that. You need to get 30 correct answers to be a minimum of 30 correct answers to get a B to continue with the registration and employment process with health institutions in English-speaking countries. So how do you do this? This is what we are going to look at in this particular lesson. To be able to get 30, it means that you should get almost all of the questions right in part A. There are 24 of them, and so you should be able to get almost all of them. 22 correct answers should be good enough to give you a good basis to do very well in the listening subtest. Then when you get to part B, you should get about 3-4 correct answers from there. Then in part C, you should look at 9-10 correct questions, and this should be enough to give you the B that you want to get. Of course, you can do better, and it all depends on how you receive these tips and apply them effectively while you practice for the test. So the first tip is that you should be able to engage regularly with audios of native speakers, not videos, because the listening subtest, you're not going to be watching videos, you're listening to audios. And you should, before the test, you should engage with audios of native speakers with different accents, because definitely you're going to hear different accents in the listening subtest with regard to the excerpt that you are listening to. So there may be Americans in there, you would have people from South Africa, from Australia, from Britain. You need to be able to listen to them, understand them. So you're looking at listening to podcasts, listening to news interviews by native speakers. And while you do, make sure that you understand what is going on. Follow the conversation that is going on. Follow the presentation that is going on. Make sure that you grasp the necessary information from there. And as you're able to do this and get to a point that it becomes easier for you, then you can use that skill, that ability to get the score for the listening subtest. Secondly, because you get to hear the recordings just once, you need to write down the answers while you listen. Do not say that I'll wait till everything is over and then I'll write the answers. You wouldn't remember a thing in the excerpts that you listen to. So you need to get the answers down while you listen. You're writing the answers to part A on the question paper in the space provided, or in the spaces provided, and for B and C you are shading. The third tip is that you should beware of distractors. In the lesson, in a previous lesson that looked at the structure of the listening subtest, I made mention of this. Because you have multiple choice options in B and C, you need to be wary of the distractors. And the distractors may be extra or partial information. They may be contradictions. If you're able to listen, follow the information very well, you should be able to fish out the distractor from the three options that you have. Of course, one option would be odd, and so you can easily put that aside. Then you can settle on the right answer after you've dealt with the distractor. You should be able to identify and develop the right skills needed for each part. Develop the right skills needed for each part. This is very, very important. Unlike other tests that gets you better towards your score as you practice and practice, OET actually compels candidates to develop skills for each of the subtests that you have. And so you should be able to develop the right set of skills that you need for each part of the listening subtest. For example, you should be able to grasp details. You should be able to grasp details when you're listening to part A to complete the 24 note completion questions that you have. You should be able to do targeted listening. Targeted listening would help you to get specific information from the excerpt you're listening to. Paraphrases are very, very important because the wording of the information that you hear would be paraphrased for you as questions and as multiple choice options in the parts B and C. The information that you get in the excerpt will be paraphrased as questions as well as options for the parts B and C. You should be able to tell what information has been paraphrased to get your answers. However, whatever you hear in the recordings are what you're supposed to write down. So you write down exactly the same thing you hear. Or better still, you look at the grammar of the notes that you're completing or the questions that you are answering to be able to get the correct answer. For the OET listening subtest, you have to write either a word or a short phrase. So in instances where you have to complete a sentence, make sure that the answer is complete enough in terms of the number of words that you have, so that you don't omit certain keywords that you need to write. Either a word or a short phrase, and a short phrase could be about between 2 to 6 words. And so look to write the complete answers as you put down the answers to the questions. You should be able to anticipate what words or word forms are likely to be the answers to the questions. So you find in part A, let me use a part A for an example. You find, let's say, question 1, and the subheading is about treatment. The question 1 is needs, then you have the ellipsis over there, the dash, dash, dash over there. If the question is beginning with needs, what word or word form do you think would complete this particular note? Do you need an adjective or a noun or a verb or a preposition to complete this particular note? If it needs, then it will be something, which is a noun. So needs either food or rest or needs to travel. If you're able to read the notes, time is allocated for you to read the question. So while you do that, you should be able to analyze what words or word forms are likely to be the answers. It would make it easier for you to get the answers from the chunk of information that you receive. You should be able to manage your time very, very well and very, very effectively. For instance, you have 30 seconds for reading questions in part A. You're reading 24 questions in 30 seconds. These are just note completion questions. So 30 seconds is more than enough for you to do that. If you're able to do that as quickly as you can, you should be able to read the questions, understand them, and focus on about 2 to 3 questions at a time. Of course, you don't have to take your focus away from the subheadings that you have. This would help you to know where the recordings have reached and what information you need to answer the questions. Manage your time very well to be able to get your answers down. When it's time for reading questions, you need to read the questions because you need to know what you're listening for. If you have no idea what you're listening for, then even when the answers come, you would miss them because you wouldn't know, you have no idea what questions you are answering. You should write your answers in the appropriate spaces. Write your answers to part A in the spaces provided on the question paper, and for B and C you are shading, and you should shade properly. Use a pencil. Of course, a pencil will be provided to you, and you can always go along with an extra one for emergencies. Shade properly. Let it be legible. Let it be clear enough what you have shaded because it's going to be scanned by a computer. And once the computer is unable to detect the shade, then of course you get that answer wrong. Check your answers during pauses in between the recordings and at the end of all 3 parts when 2 minutes is allocated for that. Check your answers. Check your answers. Be sure that you have the right answers. Although spelling is not so much of a problem when it comes to especially the part A where you are completing note questions. You should be able to get the spelling right or something close to the right spelling. The examiner should be able to tell that, okay, this is the word the fellow wanted to put down. Otherwise, then you move away too far from the correct spelling and it becomes an entirely different word. Make sure that you check that you have the answers, you have all the answers down. Make sure that you've shaded properly. Check your answers and be sure that everything is there during the listening subtest. Do not waste any minute, any second in the listening subtest that you're doing because each second counts. It would help you to answer the questions, to read the questions, check your answers, and all of that to be able to get the score that you're supposed to get. Remember, I said at the beginning of the class that you need to get almost all of the answers right for the part A. And it's easy to do that after a lot of practice and after developing the right skills for that. Then you should be able to manage 3 or 4 correct answers in part B and about 9 to 10 of them in part C. As the parts progress, the difficulty level increases a little bit, and especially for B and T that you're dealing with multiple choice options, it can be a bit tricky for you to get the right answer. So make sure that you give off your best in part A to be able to do very well in B and C also. I'll see you in the next lessons. Okay, just before we go, let's look at these other tips. You should use the interview questions or signposting as guide in the part C, where you're listening to a presentation or an interview. You should use the questions of the interviewer to help you know where the recordings have reached and where you should move to answer the questions. And if it's a presentation, you use the signposting, for example, labeling. Okay, so now let's talk about the effects of the disease. When that comes, you know that the presenter is moving to the effects of the disease for you to be able to move to that aspect of the questions. Read MCQs. Are you supposed to read MCQs before the audios or after the audios? When it comes to multiple choice options, both approaches, reading before or after the excerpts, are okay. It depends largely on the individual. If you are able to read the audios, the multiple choice options before the excerpts play, then you know exactly what you should listen for when it comes to those three options. But for some people, this becomes very confusing, and that makes them unable to easily decide on what the answer is. So they would want to wait till the excerpt has been played before they read the multiple choice questions to be able to get the answer. Whatever one works for you, be able to tell when you have practiced a lot. So you should do that as candidates before the final test to know which one works best for you. Read and understand questions before the audio plays. I've talked about this at some point. You should know what you're listening for, so that when that comes, you'll be able to tell the answer. And what you're listening for depends on the questions that you have. And so you should read the questions before the excerpt plays. Understand the question also. You should be able to anticipate answers in part A. I've talked about this already. I have also mentioned that you should take note of headings and subheadings that you have in the recordings, as well as what you have on the question paper. I've talked about spelling, though it's not a big deal. It's important that you get something close to the right answer, and it could be in American or British English. It's not really important which version you write. You should be able to get close to the right answer, or you should write the correct spelling. Answers must be grammatically correct. I mentioned that in the previous tips, that you should make sure that for example, for sentence or for notes completion questions, the phrase or the word that you put down fits in grammatically. At some point, it will help you know how correct or wrong your answer is. I'll see you in the next lessons, and all the best while preparing for the OET. Goodbye.